Supreme Commander Thrall's stood before the observation port, his four primary eyes dilating in patterns that betrayed confusion to those who knew his species well. The warship before them violated every principle of efficient design the Vraxian military academies had perfected over millennia. It was too large, consuming resources that should have been distributed across a fleet. Its energy signature burned with an intensity that suggested reckless disregard for fuel conservation. Weapons batteries lined its hull in redundant clusters that spoke of paranoia rather than strategic planning. And, yet, something in the way it moved through space, with the deliberate grace of a predator that had never known fear, made Thrall's secondary hearts beat faster. Analysis, he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that denoted absolute authority among his kind. The tactical officer, a younger Vraxian named Kethri, manipulated the holographic interface with trembling manipulator appendages. Supreme Commander, the vessel's mass suggests a crew complement of no more than 800 individuals. Our fleet comprises 47 capital ships with a combined force of 160,000 warriors. By all conventional metrics, they should be fleeing. And, yet they advance, Thrall's observed. The human ship did indeed advance, not with the desperate rush of a cornered animal, but with the patient, inexorable pace of something that had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Its approach was mathematically perfect, positioning itself in a formation that simultaneously minimized its profile to incoming fire while maximizing its own firing solutions. Whoever commanded that vessel understood warfare at a level that made Thrall's scales itch with an emotion he had not felt since his youth. Unease. The communications officer's alarm signal cut through the tension. Supreme Commander, we are receiving a transmission. Audio only. The universal translation matrix is struggling with the linguistic structure. Play it, Thrall's ordered. What emerged from the speakers was a voice that seemed to carry the weight of iron and ice. The words were simple, almost crude in their directness, but the tone beneath them suggested depths of meaning that the translation software could only approximate. Vraxian Fleet. This is Captain Marcus Kane of the UESS Indomitable. You have entered human-protected space and committed acts of aggression against 3 colony worlds under our jurisdiction. I am authorized to offer you one opportunity to withdraw. You have 10 minutes to begin your retreat. If you are still in this system at the end of that time, I will interpret your presence as a declaration of total war. Kane out. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Thrall's heard one of his subordinates make the chittering sound that indicated disbelief among the Vraxian species. He understood the impulse. A single ship, challenging a fleet. It was madness. It was suicide. It was exactly what Thrall's would have done if their positions were reversed and, he believed, truly believed, that he could win. Open a channel, he commanded. This is Supreme Commander Thrall's of the Vraxian hegemony. Your bravado is noted, human, but ultimately futile. We have claimed this region of space by right of superior force. Your colonies existed at our sufferance, and that sufferance has expired. Stand down and prepare to be boarded, and we will ensure your crew receives honorable treatment as prisoners of war. The response came almost immediately, and this time Thrall's heard something in that human voice that made his combat implants trigger involuntary threat response protocols. Commander Thrall's I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to decline. You see, I've read your species' history. I know about the 17 civilizations you've assimilated in the past 3 centuries. I've reviewed the reports from our colonies, the orbital bombardments, the selective executions, the forced relocations. I understand exactly what your honorable treatment entails. There was a pause, and, when the voice continued, it carried a quality that the translation software tagged as sardonic amusement, though Thrall's suspected the nuance was far darker. I also know something about myself, Commander. I know that 10 years ago, I was a different man. Weaker. More hesitant. The kind of officer who would have waited for reinforcements, who would have questioned his orders, who would have looked for diplomatic solutions even when the blood of innocents still stained the ground. That man died in the ruins of New Jakarta, watching colony ships fall from the sky because I hesitated. Because I was afraid of what I might become if I did what was necessary. The human ship's engines flared brighter, and Thrall's watched as weapon systems began powering up with an energy curve that his tactical displays flagged as dangerously unstable. I destroyed that weak version of myself, Commander. Burned him away like dead wood. And what remained is something that you're going to find very difficult to destroy. Your 9 minutes start now. The channel closed. Kethri turned from his station, confusion evident in his posture. Supreme Commander, this is irrational. Even if their vessel possesses advanced weaponry, the mathematics are absolute. We will overwhelm them through sheer volume of fire. Yes, Thrall's said quietly. We will. But I find myself wondering what price we'll pay for that victory. He had not survived 200 battles by ignoring his instincts, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. He activated the fleet-wide command channel. All vessels to battle formation Delta 7. Focus fire protocols on the human ship. Deploy fighter screens and prepare electronic countermeasures. Shields to maximum. As the Vraxian fleet began its ponderous reorganization, Thrall's pulled up the intelligence reports on this new species called humans. They were a young race, barely 3 centuries into serious space exploration. Their territory was small, their fleet limited. By every rational measure, they should have been easy prey. But there were anomalies in the data. The humans had no unified government, yet they had somehow coordinated a military response across their fractured political systems with remarkable speed. Their technology was inferior to Vraxian standards in most areas, but they seemed to apply it with a creativity that bordered on recklessness. And there were notes flagged by intelligence analysts as potentially significant about human cultural concepts that didn't translate well into Vraxian understanding. One phrase kept appearing in the reports: never count out a human who has nothing left to lose. Thrall's was still contemplating this when his tactical officer's alarm shriek pierced the command deck. Multiple missile launches. Supreme Commander, the human vessel has deployed over 2,000 warheads on ballistic trajectories. Estimated time to fleet impact, 4 minutes. Point defense systems online. Destroy them. The Vraxian fleet's defensive batteries opened up, filling the void with precisely calculated streams of energy and kinetic projectiles. The first wave of human missiles died in brilliant explosions, then the second, then the third. Thrall's watched the intercept efficiency ratings with satisfaction. 97%. 98%. Their systems were performing exactly as designed. But missiles kept coming. Wave after wave, faster than seemed possible for a single ship to launch. And, with each wave, the point defense systems had to work harder, tracking more targets, burning through energy reserves at an accelerating rate. Sir, Kethri reported, his voice tight with stress, the missiles are adapting. Each wave incorporates evasive patterns that counter our previous intercepts. It's as if they're learning. Thrall's finished. He felt a cold certainty settling into his thoughts. This wasn't random fire. This was a systematic degradation of his fleet's defensive capabilities, and, somewhere in the depths of that human warship, someone was watching the results with the patience of a hunter setting a trap. The intercept rate dropped to 93%. Then, 88%. The first missile penetrated the defensive screen and impacted against the shields of a frigate on the fleet's outer edge. The explosion was smaller than expected, barely enough to make the shields flicker. Minimal damage, the tactical officer reported. The warhead was Supreme Commander. The frigate's shields collapsed entirely, flickering out of existence as if someone had thrown a switch. A second later, every defensive battery on the vessel went dark. Electromagnetic pulse warheads, Thrall's breathed. They're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to blind us. As if an answer, 3 more missiles penetrated the now strained defensive screen. 3 more Vraxian ships went dark, their systems overwhelmed by precisely calibrated electromagnetic attacks. And, through it all, the human warship continued its steady advance, its main batteries still silent, still waiting. Thrall's made his decision with the speed that had earned him his rank.
All ships, emergency scatter pattern. Get distance from that vessel and regroup at rally point Gamma. Now.
The Vraxian fleet began to break formation, their ships accelerating away from the advancing human warship.
It was not a retreat, not officially, but a tactical repositioning.
That's what Thrall's told himself as he watched his forces separate, creating distance and angles of attack that would allow them to bring their superior numbers to bear without risking the kind of close engagement where that human ship's clear advantages in tactical innovation could dominate. "Sir," the communications officer said, "we're receiving another transmission from the human captain."
"Play it."
That iron voice filled the command deck again, but this time there was something else in it. Not anger or triumph, but a kind of weary certainty that was somehow more frightening than either emotion would have been.
"You're running, Commander. That's smart. Your survival instincts are good. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about survival anymore.
This stopped being about survival the moment you murdered 4,000 colonists on New Jakarta.
6,000 on Terra Nova. 11,000 on Kepler 442b. I have the names, Commander. All of them.
And I made myself a promise while I was watching their memorial walls." There was a pause, and Thrall's heard the sound of something being activated in the background of the transmission. "I promised that the man who let New Jakarta die, the hesitant, frightened version of myself who worried more about his career and his conscience than about doing what was necessary, I promised that man would never command a ship again. I killed him, Commander. I took every weakness, every doubt, every fear that made me hesitate when action was required, and I burned it all away.
What's left doesn't sleep well. Doesn't dream of home.
Doesn't worry about tribunals or medals or history's judgment." The human warship's main batteries ignited, and Thrall's displays lit up with proximity warnings as energy beams lanced across the expanding distance between predator and prey. What's left only cares about one thing: making sure that every species in this galaxy understands that humanity protects its own. And that anyone who harms our people will face someone who has already destroyed the part of himself that could show mercy. The beams missed deliberately, Thrall's realized, carving lines of destruction through the space where his ships had been moments before.
A demonstration. A promise. You have 6 minutes, Commander.
Use them wisely. The transmission ended, and Thrall's found himself facing a decision that would define not just this battle, but potentially the entire future relationship between the Vraxian hegemony and this new, terrifying species. His tactical officer was already running calculations.
"Supreme Commander, we can establish a defensive perimeter at Rally Point Gamma.
Our combined firepower will be sufficient to destroy the human vessel once it enters optimal range. Casualties estimated at 12 to 15% of fleet strength, but victory is mathematically certain."
"Mathematically certain," Thrall's repeated.
He thought about that voice, about the cold certainty in it. About a man who had systematically eliminated his own capacity for hesitation. About someone who had looked at his weaknesses and destroyed them rather than accepting them as limitations. In Vraxian culture, such a transformation was considered both admirable and deeply disturbing. Their military philosophy taught that a warrior should integrate all aspects of self, strength and weakness, mercy and ruthlessness into a balanced whole. The idea of excising parts of one's psyche was seen as a form of madness. But madness could be tactically effective, especially when wielded with precision.
"Open a channel to the fleet," Thrall's ordered.
All ships are to the proximity alarms screened. On the tactical display, Thrall's watched as the human warship executed a maneuver that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size.
It wasn't following them to the rally point.
It was cutting them off, using a gravitational slingshot around the system's inner moon to achieve an acceleration curve that his own engineers would have deemed suicidal.
And it was still accelerating. "Impact trajectory," Kethri gasped.
"Supreme Commander, they're going to ram the fleet." Thrall's felt time slow down, the way it always did in moments of absolute crisis. He watched the projected paths on his display, saw the inevitable collision course, and understood with perfect clarity that the human captain had never intended a conventional engagement. This entire confrontation had been designed to force exactly this moment, a choice between holding position and taking devastating losses, or scattering in disarray and abandoning any pretense of tactical cohesion. All ships, evasive maneuvers.
Maximum emergency thrust. The Vraxian fleet exploded outward like seeds from a burst pod, each vessel scrambling to escape the trajectory of the human warship. The larger capital ships were too slow, too ponderous to react in time. Thrall's eyes watched in horrified fascination as the UESS Indomitable bore down on the heavy cruiser Vengeance of Stars like a meteor of human determination and steel. At the last possible moment, the human ship rolled, presenting its dorsal surface to the Vraxian vessel. The two ships passed within meters of each other, so close that their shield harmonics screamed in interference. And, as they passed, the Indomitable's dorsal batteries, positioned exactly where they needed to be, opened fire at point-blank range. The Vengeance of Stars simply ceased to exist. Not exploded, not disabled, erased, torn into constituent atoms by energy beams that had been waiting for exactly this moment, this perfect alignment, this inevitable conclusion to a tactical scenario that the human captain had scripted from his first transmission. He planned this, Thrall's eyes said aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Every word, every missile, every maneuver. He's been writing this battle from the beginning, and we've been following his script. The human ship emerged from the destruction of the Vengeance of Stars without slowing, its shields glowing white-hot but still functional. It carved a path through the scattering Vraxian fleet, and, wherever it passed, ships died or fled or simply lost the will to maintain formation in the face of this impossible, relentless assault. Thrall's eyes' command ship shuddered as near-miss explosions rattled the hull. His crew was performing admirably, their training and discipline holding despite the chaos. But he could see in their postures, in the way they moved, that something fundamental had shifted. They had entered this system as conquerors. They were leaving it, if they left it at all, as survivors of an encounter with something they didn't understand. Supreme Commander, his second officer reported, were receiving distress signals from multiple vessels. The Claw of Dominance is requesting permission to withdraw. The Star Shatterer reports critical damage to primary systems. The grant all withdrawal requests, Thrall's eyes interrupted. Fleet-wide retreat order. All vessels are to exit this system using the fastest available jump routes. We will regroup at the Hegemony core worlds. Sir, we still have 41 functional vessels. If we coordinate, we will coordinate our retreat, officer. That is my final order. As the Vraxian fleet began its withdrawal, jump drives activating in rippling sequences as ships fled into hyperspace, Thrall's eyes kept his eyes on the human warship. It was pursuing them, still accelerating, still promising destruction to anyone who lingered too long. But it made no effort to prevent the retreat itself. It shepherded them out of the system like a predator content to have marked its territory. The final transmission came just as Thrall's eyes' own ship prepared to jump. Commander Thrall's eyes. I want you to remember something. I want you to tell your superiors, your government, your entire species. The man you spoke to today wasn't always this way. I had doubt once. I had mercy. I had all the weaknesses that make a person human in the softest, kindest sense of that word. But I looked at those weaknesses, and I made a choice. I killed them. I became something harder, colder, more focused. Because in this universe, the only way to protect what you love is to become strong enough that nothing can stand against you. There was a pause, and Thrall's eyes heard something that might have been regret in that iron voice. Your people hurt mine. So I showed you what happens when a human destroys his weak self and becomes something that can't be destroyed by others. I showed you the price of making an enemy of someone with nothing left to lose but the mission. Take that message back to your hegemony, Commander. Tell them that humanity has officers like me now. Tell them that we've learned what we need to sacrifice to survive in a galaxy that doesn't respect weakness. The channel closed. Thrall's eyes' ship jumped, and the last thing his sensors registered was the human warship, alone in the void, standing watch over the space it had claimed through will and violence and the systematic elimination of every doubt that might have stayed its hand. The Vraxian hegemony's central command occupied a structure that had been carved from the core of a planetoid over 10,000 cycles of expansion and refinement.
Its corridors spoke of power accumulated slowly, carefully, with the patience of a species that measured time in geological epochs. Into these halls came Supreme Commander Thrallseyes, summoned to explain a defeat that should have been impossible. The Council of Supremacy sat in a chamber designed to humble those who appeared before it. The ceiling arched into darkness far overhead, studded with lights that mimicked the stars of Vraxian-controlled space. Each point of light represented a conquered world, a civilization brought into the fold, a victory in the long march of hegemony expansion. There were thousands of lights. Looking at them now, Thrallseyes wondered how many of those civilizations had produced someone like Captain Marcus Kane. How many had fought back with the kind of focused determination that came from abandoning every consideration except victory? And how many had been defeated precisely because they couldn't bring themselves to make such a sacrifice? Supreme Commander Thrallseyes, the voice of High Counselor Vexrath echoed through the chamber, you will explain how a single human vessel defeated a fleet 47 times its size. Thrallseyes had prepared for this moment during the long journey back to the core worlds. He had reviewed the battle recordings hundreds of times, analyzing every decision, every tactical choice. He had spoken with his officers, gathering their impressions and insights. And he had come to a conclusion that disturbed him more than the defeat itself. Honorable Council, he began, his voice carrying the formal harmonics of military reporting, the human vessel did not defeat our fleet through superior technology or numbers. It defeated us through superior understanding of a principle that we have, perhaps, forgotten in our long dominance. Explain, Vexrath commanded. The human captain, Marcus Kane, represents a transformation that their species appears capable of undergoing under extreme stress. Our psychological profiles of humanity suggested they were emotional, unpredictable, prone to irrational behavior. These profiles were accurate for the human baseline. But Captain Kane represents something different, a human who has systematically eliminated the emotional and psychological factors that would normally limit aggressive action. Thrallseyes activated a holographic display, showing the battle sequence. Every action he took was calculated to achieve maximum psychological and tactical effect. The initial challenge wasn't bravado, it was a test to see if we would respond with fear or aggression. The missile barrage wasn't intended to destroy our fleet, it was designed to degrade our defensive capabilities while teaching his targeting systems our countermeasure patterns. The ramming approach wasn't suicidal, it was a precisely calculated maneuver to force us into a lose-lose scenario. Another counselor, her scales bearing the blue tint of the science cast, spoke. You suggest this human has removed his capacity for self-preservation? Such a psychological state is unstable, unsustainable. No, counselor. He has removed his capacity for doubt, for hesitation, for the kind of self-reflection that might question his mission. His self-preservation instinct remains intact, he had no intention of actually dying in that engagement. But he has eliminated the fear of death that might have made him hesitate at critical moments. Thrallseyes paused, choosing his next words carefully. In our culture, we speak of balance. We teach our warriors to integrate all aspects of self. But the humans have discovered something we may have overlooked. Sometimes, in certain circumstances, the systematic elimination of specific psychological constraints can create a tactically superior combatant. This is madness, another counselor declared. A warrior who has destroyed parts of himself is damaged, incomplete. Such an individual cannot be trusted with command. And, yet, Thrallseyes countered, humanity has trusted Captain Kane with command of one of their most powerful warships. Which suggests that either they are collectively mad, or they understand something about the nature of modern warfare that we have been too comfortable to learn. The chamber fell silent. The Council of Supremacy had not reached their positions by being unable to recognize uncomfortable truths. High Counselor Vexrath spoke again, his tone thoughtful. You believe this Captain Kane represents a new kind of threat? Not just a skilled commander, but a philosophical challenge to our military doctrine. I believe, Honorable Counselor, that we have encountered the logical conclusion of a certain kind of military evolution. Captain Kane mentioned that he had been different once, weaker, more hesitant. Something happened that forced him to change. He described it as destroying his weak self. And the result is someone who cannot be defeated by conventional means because he has already eliminated the internal weaknesses that conventional tactics exploit.
Thrall's eyes brought up another display, this one showing intelligence reports from human space. Our analysts have been monitoring human communications since the engagement. Captain Kane is not unique.
There are reports of other officers who have undergone similar transformations. Humans who lost families in attacks and emerged as focused instruments of retribution. Commanders who survived impossible situations by abandoning every doctrine that prioritized their own survival over mission completion.
They are creating monsters, the science counselor observed.
They are creating survivors, Thrall's eyes corrected.
And they are doing it systematically.
The humans have apparently concluded that in order to exist in a hostile galaxy, they must be willing to transform their people into something harder than their enemies. They are weaponizing trauma, turning psychological damage into tactical advantage.
Another long silence filled the chamber. Finally, Vexwrath spoke. What is your recommendation, Supreme Commander?
Thrall's eyes had known this question was coming, and he had prepared his answer.
We have 3 options, Honorable Council.
First, we can continue our expansion into human space, accepting that we will face more officers like Captain Kane and that our casualty rates will be significantly higher than projections suggested. Second, we can bypass human space entirely, focusing our expansion in other directions and avoiding contact with this species until we better understand them.
And the third option? Vexwrath prompted.
We attempt to understand how humanity creates individuals like Captain Kane, and we consider whether our own military training should incorporate elements of this philosophy. If a warrior who has destroyed his weak self cannot be destroyed by others, then perhaps we need warriors who have undergone similar transformations.
The reaction from the council was immediate and negative.
Multiple counselors began speaking at once, their harmonics clashing in patterns of outrage and disbelief. The idea of deliberately damaging the psychological integration of Vraxian warriors was apparently beyond what most of them could consider. But High Counselor Vexwrath raised a manipulator appendage for silence, and the chamber quieted. Supreme Commander Thrall's eyes, he said slowly, you were one of our finest officers before this encounter. Your record speaks of hundreds of victories achieved with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. And now you stand before us suggesting that we fundamentally alter our approach to military training based on a single engagement with a species we barely understand.
Yes, Honorable Counselor. Why? Thrall's eyes thought about how to answer that question.
He thought about the moment when Captain Kane's ship had executed that impossible maneuver, about the cold certainty in that human voice, about the feeling of watching his fleet scatter before a force that shouldn't have been able to challenge them. Because, he said finally, I recognized something in Captain Kane's tactics. A philosophy of warfare that I had only seen once before, in historical records of our most ancient conflicts. There was a time, thousands of cycles ago, when our species fought for survival against enemies that threatened our extinction. In those days, our warriors understood that victory required sacrifices. They understood that sometimes, in order to protect the whole, individuals must abandon parts of themselves. He gestured to the lights above them, the thousands of conquered worlds. We have been dominant for so long that we have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. We have optimized everything, our tactics, our technology, our training. But we have also grown comfortable. We assume our superiority. And that assumption is itself a weakness. Captain Kane reminded me that survival, true survival, requires a willingness to transform. To look at yourself honestly, identify the weaknesses that will get you killed, and eliminate them without mercy. He has done this to himself. And, in doing so, he has become something that our entire fleet could not destroy. Thrall's eyes paused, then continued. The humans are young. Their technology is inferior. Their territory is small. But they have something we have lost, the memory of what it takes to survive in a universe that doesn't care about fairness or honor or the beautiful philosophies we have constructed during our long dominance. They remember that sometimes, the only way to protect what you love is to become something that can destroy what threatens it. The council chamber was utterly silent now. Every member was listening, and Thrall's could see in their postures that his words were having an effect. Fear was a powerful teacher, and he had brought them the lesson of his defeat. I do not recommend that we abandon our principles, Thrall's said. I do not suggest that we start deliberately damaging our warriors' psyches. But I do think we need to recognize that we are about to enter a new phase of galactic politics. One where species like humanity, species that have learned to weaponize their own capacity for transformation, will be our equals or our superiors, regardless of our technological advantages.
High Counselor Vexrath considered this for a long moment.
You paint a disturbing picture, Supreme Commander. A galaxy where survival requires self-mutilation, where strength comes from destroying parts of oneself. With respect, Honorable Counselor, I paint a realistic picture.
The galaxy has always been this way. We simply have the luxury of forgetting it. And what of Captain Kane himself? What do you believe motivates him now, having destroyed what he calls his weak self?
Thrall's thought about this carefully. I believe he is motivated by a mission that has become his entire identity. He stated that he made a promise while watching memorial walls. Walls bearing the names of humans our forces killed. That promise has consumed everything else. He is no longer a person in the traditional sense, he is a living weapon, pointed at anyone who threatens humanity. Can such an individual be negotiated with? I don't know, Honorable Counselor. But I know that I would not want to test that question from a position of weakness. The council conferred among themselves, their harmonics too quiet for Thrall's to interpret.
Finally, Vexrath spoke again.
The council has reached a preliminary decision. We will implement option 2, bypassing human space and avoiding contact with this species until we have conducted more thorough analysis.
However, we are also authorizing a new research program. We will study the concept of tactical psychological transformation. Not to implement it necessarily, but to understand it. If humanity represents a new evolutionary path in military philosophy, we must comprehend it fully. A wise decision, Honorable Council. You will lead this research program, Supreme Commander Thrall's. You have looked into the face of this new kind of warrior and survived. That experience is valuable. But understand, if your research suggests that we must abandon our principles of psychological integration, the Council will not approve such measures lightly. I understand, Honorable Counselor. As Thrall's left the council chamber, he felt the weight of his new assignment settling onto his shoulders.
He would study Captain Marcus Kane, try to understand the transformation the human had undergone, attempt to categorize and analyze a process that seemed to defy rational examination. But part of him wondered if understanding was even possible. How could you analyze someone who had systematically eliminated the parts of themselves that made such analysis predictable? How could you prepare for an opponent who had already fought and won the hardest battle, the one against their own weaknesses? The last thing Captain Kane had said echoed in Thrall's mind, tell them that humanity has officers like me now. Not an officer. Officers, plural. Humanity was apparently producing multiple individuals who had undergone this transformation. Which meant that Captain Kane wasn't an aberration or an accident. He was the vanguard of a new human military philosophy. And, somewhere in human space, in shipyards and academies and memorial halls, more people were looking at their weaknesses and making the same choice Kane had made. They were destroying the parts of themselves that hesitated, that doubted, that valued their own peace of mind over the mission of protecting their species. They were becoming weapons that could not be destroyed by others because they had already destroyed themselves in every way that mattered. Thrall's returned to his quarters and began his research, knowing that he was studying not just a military tactic, but a fundamental question about consciousness and survival. Could strength really come from self-destruction? Could you make yourself invincible by eliminating your vulnerabilities, even if those vulnerabilities were part of what made you a complete being? Captain Kane had answered yes. Humanity was answering yes. And the galaxy would have to grapple with the implications of that answer. In the darkness of his quarters, surrounded by data on human psychology and military history, Thrall's began to understand something that frightened him more than the battle itself.
Humanity wasn't creating monsters.
They were creating something far more dangerous. They were creating believers. People who had found a philosophy that explained their trauma, validated their transformation, and gave them permission to become exactly as hard and cold and focused as the universe required. And belief, Thrall's eyes knew, was the most powerful weapon in existence. Captain Marcus Kane stood on the observation deck of the UESS Indomitable, looking out at the void where the Vraxian fleet had fled. The system was quiet now, the only evidence of the battle a field of debris that would orbit the system's star for millennia, a monument to the day humanity had drawn its line in the stars. His executive officer, Commander Sarah Chan, approached with the careful step of someone who understood that her captain valued silence. She had served with him for 2 years now, since shortly after his transformation from the man he had been into the instrument he had become. Damage report, Kane said without turning from the viewport. Shield generators at 40% capacity.
3 of the main battery arrays need recalibration. Structural integrity is green across all sections. Casualties, 7 injured, none critical. We got lucky, sir.
Luck had nothing to do with it, Commander.
Every element of that engagement was calculated. Yes, sir. Chen hesitated, then continued. Sir, I've been reviewing the tactical recordings.
The ramming approach that was closer than the initial projections suggested. If they had reacted 3 seconds faster, they wouldn't have, Kane interrupted. I studied Vraxian psychology for 8 months before this engagement. I knew how they would respond to each stimulus.
Fear of collision is hardwired into their survival instincts at a deeper level than it is for humans.
They had no choice but to scatter.
And if you were wrong?
Now Kane did turn, and Chen saw in his eyes the thing that made her both admire and fear her captain. There was nothing there, no doubt, no regret, no fear. Just a kind of crystalline clarity that came from having burned away everything except mission focus. If I was wrong, Commander, then we would have proven that humanity's new military philosophy has limitations. The Admiralty would have learned a valuable lesson, and the next officer to face the Vraxians would have better data. My death would have served a purpose.
That's not normal, sir. That's not how people think.
You're right.
It's not how people think. It's how weapons think. And that's what I've made myself into.
Kane returned his gaze to the viewport.
Do you know what I was before New Jakarta, Commander? I've read your file, sir. Files don't capture it. I was a good officer. Competent.
I cared about my crew, worried about casualties, lost sleep over difficult decisions. I had a family, a sister, 2 nephews.
I had hobbies. I painted, if you can believe that. Watercolors, mostly landscapes from the colony worlds I visited.
There was no nostalgia in his voice, just clinical observation.
He might have been describing a historical figure. And then, New Jakarta happened.
I was commanding a destroyer in orbit when the Vraxian Bombardus response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. It continued to nudge Claude along, continue 3/3.